I've shared with all of the expert speakers the executive summary of it. And to some of them, those who are requested, I shared the full report on it. So we will now listen to them and do it. So Dr. Mathur, welcome. And yes, probably it is a slight mistake from my side that whether it starts at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. I think that was a thing probably, and that got Dr. Mathur delayed. But here we are. So let me start officially. Saurabh, you can start.
Yes, Vivi, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Hi, Eric. How are you? Good afternoon, Dr. Reddy, Mr. Reddy.
Okay, you know each other. You know Eric.
Good afternoon,
well,
Dr. Mathurji.
which is good.
How are you, sir?
Yeah, good, Mathur sir. How are you?
Fine. So please continue.
Okay, we are yet to start officially. So,
Okay.
So we'll be starting it now. Saurabh, have you now started recording and
Yes.
broadcasting?
Yeah, the recording and broadcasting is now on. So
Okay.
we're good to go.
So greetings to all of you on a World NGO Day, which started in 2010. Surprisingly, it started in an area which is quite in turmoil now, which is in the Baltic countries. And in fact, when it started, Russia was part of it. And the Baltic Sea initiatives were going on very well. And it was called as a Baltic NGO Forum. Now here we are to celebrate 2022 World NGO Day, to celebrate and to look at certain challenges and opportunities in the World Natural Heritage Site inscribed in 2012. Let me be very clear that the World Natural Heritage was the Western Ghats. There are 39 serial sites which were inscribed, and Kaas Plateau, which was the northernmost of the 39 sites. And we are talking about the annual report card of this of 2009 and 2020. The annual report card was being done on a regular basis by their policy center, which is an NGO. But it did not do it standing apart from the other NGOs. We got all other NGOs like one in Satara, which is the nearest town to Kaas Plateau, called as Ranwata. And it was also done in collaboration with some of the experts like Dr. Aparna Watwe and also Prerna Agarwal, who are also well-known experts in biodiversity and particularly in Kaas Plateau related activities. Right from beginning in 2012, when it was inscribed, and myself and Dr. Mathur had an honor and opportunity to be there in St. Petersburg. And that time, having retired from United Nations Environment Program and having started an NGO, I had an opportunity to present what is called as a community view of Western Ghats. And it was a part of the certain question answers which was done before inscription. And I believe, which Dr. Vinod Mathur also feels, that contributed to an impact of getting the inscription done. Since then, we thought that inscription is just a first step. And what needs to be done is the management of that. What follows is important. We have a typical, our Prime Minister Modi's statement that Namankan is important. The inscription is important. But what is more important is a Mulyankan. That is, what is the value of managing that site and conserving that site? And this is what exactly is done through the annual report card. And having come from the United Nations Environment Program, which continuously monitors the environment, I have that DNA to see that, okay, we got an inscription, let's see how we can manage it. It's not just achieving a summit, but also making sure that getting to the summit and then descending or coming down to the level of the people also has certain values. We have been very particular to make sure that the community is part of it. And that is the most difficult part of it. Kaas is a village. And there are 5 other villages which are a part of the whole Kaas Plateau. And getting those villages along with us in order to do the conservation was a challenge. Because as you know, whether it is in India or whether it is in France or whether it is anywhere, the villages represent a nature, but at the same time, the politics. But we tried to filter out the politics out of it and see how they can work collaboratively, collectively, and most important, what is called effective. And that's what we did in order to give them a certain guidance along with what is called as a JFMC, Joint Forest Management Committee, which is mainly guided by the Forest Department of state government, but also in collaboration with NGOs. And it worked very well. And I think some of the threats which are now coming up, they are related to what is called as a overcapacity of the tourists. They are also related to a typical what is called as scattered development around the Kaas Plateau. It is also coming out with certain issues related to invasive species, alien species. It is also coming along with certain essential infrastructure, which is a part of the Kaas Plateau. A road going through it. It is also related to what is called as too many resorts around that, because the plateau represents the very high level in a Sahyadri, which is the Western Ghats of India. And all these developmental imperatives that we cannot shun, how the people are managing it there are now coming to the age of becoming an extremely formidable and challenging job to conserve Kaas is posed as a threat to the site. Well, I think we are getting early warning signal. We are not in the disaster zone yet. Lot can be done, and collectively, so we have the right kind of experts here as a speakers to talk about it. So let me start by introducing Eric Falt, the regional representative of UNESCO, and very good friend of mine. And probably he would be able to give a sort of a world overview and then coming down to the Kaas for what we can do. I have been talking to him about the Kaas for right from the day he arrived in New Delhi. So we'll listen to him. He will be introduced in more detail when his speech comes. Then we have Dr. Vinod Mathur, who is the president for this meeting. As in Hindi, we call it Adhyaksha. And Dr. Vinod Mathur is also a good friend of mine right from 2012 when I met him first in St. Petersburg. Earlier, he was a director of WII, which is the Wildlife Institute of India of Dehradun. And he has done excellent work there and has been in contact with UNESCO in a more intimate way in terms of the activities and outputs, and also designing certain project activities like Valley of Flowers and a number. He probably can talk about it, what more he has done with UNESCO other than Western Ghats. Then we have Dr. Bharucha, and he has been expert on biodiversity. But he is also, as we call it in the Indian language, a guru to many of the students who are working in our organization now, in their policy center. And he is biodiversity expert, but quite well connected with the Western Ghats. I remember in 2011, 2012, when we were having a community dialogue, Dr. Bharucha was a lead expert in telling what would be the pitfalls and what are the opportunities at that time. And finally, we have B. Venugopal Reddy, IAS, who represents the India's administration, policies, strategies, and the management of number of issues, including most important today is the forest. So welcome to all of you. Dr. Venugopal Reddy, he represents the government of Maharashtra's Forest Department, but he has been widely seen himself in various roles in Maharashtra government. And I think his advice would be extremely useful to us in order to move ahead with the management of Kaas Plateau. So I'm delighted to welcome you all. The day is important, World NGO Day. And one of the NGOs, Air Policy Center, is now celebrating it by inviting you to celebrate the work of the community, who is, I'm sure, many of them are part of us in this particular event. And they are on a YouTube, which is being now broadcast all over. And these people like Bajrang, then there is a Chikane, then I can take many names, Somnath, who have been struggling hard to conserve it. And I think their names must be taken, because they are the one who are the ground level conserving Kaas. It is a Madhav Chikane, is a Bajrang, Kadam, is Somnath. All these people are working together in these 6 villages, and we have been meeting them regularly. So welcome to them as well, apart from other NGOs around. And here is we start with Dr. Mathur. It would be good if his camera is on so that people can see him. Can I now request Dr. Mathur to go ahead with his President address? Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Dr. Rajendra, for providing this opportunity. And welcome to my friends and colleagues, Dr. Eric, Dr. Bharucha, Mr. Venugopal, and a range of youth brigade that Dr. Shendre, you have been able to gather today. It's a pleasure for me to be talking. I must admit that I have never before participated on the World NGO Day. This happens to be my first opportunity. Although I do realize now that the kind of synergies which the civil society and NGOs can bring in is very, very important. Whether we are talking of conservation or whether we are talking of social development, the role of civil society is very, very important. And that is the reason when you mentioned that this is being organized in the occasion of that, I very readily accepted that. There are a few more things which I want to share, and especially taking advantage of Mr. Venugopal's presence, because at the end of the day, it is he who has to take decisions at the policy and governance level to ensure that environment, forest, conservation, biodiversity, heritage, at least in the state of Maharashtra, are well taken care of. And I must share it with Mr. Venugopal that, sir, already Maharashtra leads the way. In the way in which Maharashtra manages its national park, tiger reserves, sanctuaries, and so on, it is a matter of pride that you and the state does it very, very nicely. And a very large number of your officers have made a mark for themselves in the field of conservation. Many of them have been trained at WII. So these are the people who are at the forefront, and I'm very sure that you would continue to encourage them in the best possible manner, because at the end of the day, it is the management of the site which is very, very important. As Mr. Rajendra mentioned, way back 10 years ago, we were struggling to get the Western Ghats inscribed. And I must narrate it to you and for my other audience. The context is very, very important. That when we tried, it was our first time that India was looking at a serial nomination. He mentioned the word that it is not only Kaas, there are 38 other sites in the state of Kerala, in the state of Tamil Nadu, in the state of Karnataka, and your own state of Maharashtra, that they come together. I have no hesitation in saying that we ourselves were not very familiar with the process of serial nomination. And at that point of time, there were very few countries, Eric would vouch for me, which had experience of nominating a serial site. So while we had some experience of nominating Kaziranga, Manas, Sundarbans, and Nanda Devi, and so on, and Kevladev, we had not handled it. So that was the challenge. Nevertheless, we took that challenge, and it was my first nomination as a technical person to be leading the Indian delegation over there. And we were very hesitant. We were very, what should I say, diffident, because it had been referred once and we were going again. But to the credit of many people, and especially Dr. Rajendra, I would say that when he came and met me, of course, his first meeting was in St. Petersburg, only on the sidelines. And when he mentioned about what kind of an effort is being undertaken already in Kaas, that actually tilted the balance. Because while we were talking about government-driven effort, he was talking about community-led effort. And to the audience in the UNESCO, community is very, very important. And therefore, when we said that our sites represents community engagement, and it is a very important site biologically. See, living in Dehradun, living in the Himalayas, I was knowing the value of Valley of Flowers, which is one of the finest sites as far as floral diversity is concerned. But when we were looking at the Western Ghats and when we were looking at Kaas, when we were talking to colleagues like Dr. Arpana and others, they tried to emphasize on me that what is Valley of Flowers to the Himalayas is the Kaas Plateau to the Southern Western Ghats. And that is the significance I want to share with everyone. And I'm sure that many of the audience is more knowledgeable about the Kaas than what I am. But the point is that it is very, very important. And therefore, when we talk of heritage, it has a prize position in those 39 serial sites that we have. And then we started looking because next to Kaas is a tiger reserve, which is also part of the heritage. But they are very different. And it is this difference which is very, very important. I must stress here that it is this difference which has to be managed differently. While we do have experience of managing tiger reserves and prominent national park like Radhanagari and Chandoli, our experience of managing Kaas was very limited. And especially the kind of pressures which come on Kaas are very different to what would come. Poaching is not an issue. Whereas poaching could be an important issue in the nearby Radhanagari. But then how do you deal with the tourism? How do we convert it into responsible tourism? So these were the kind of challenges. And how do we get into people's participation? So these were the challenges. And I'm so glad that not only in 2012, 10 years from now, people like Dr. Rajendra and his group are still talking about the way we need to manage and monitor areas like Kaas Plateau. So this is a very important learning, Eric, because you also interact with other sites all over the world. So this is a very small lesson that how to manage a small site which has only floral elements, which has a very typical terrain. The diversity is coming out of that terrain as well. And it has huge pressures in the context of people who want to visit and enjoy. So believe me, this question, I have been part of the wildlife management, Dr. Bharucha, as you know, for all these years. But this question was raised that can we do a barbed wire fencing in Kaas? That was a challenge. So we were then taken aback and said that, look, we need to consider, we need to look at, and the models of management that we have been practicing in other sites cannot be just simply translated over here. And that is the real challenge before us. And as Dr. Shendra, you said that inscription is important, management is more important, and then further important is the monitoring and evaluation, which also you referred. And I would like to add in your list, which you are already doing, but I want to draw the attention of this audience to the dissemination and outreach. See, this is something when it comes to heritage site, when it comes to management, we need to do that because we need to reach out to people. We need to have an upfront communication and outreach strategy. And I'm sure my colleague, Dr. Bharucha, who is a leading expert on that, will be elaborating on that. But from my perspective, while the first step of inventory is okay, we have done it. Management still needs to be considered, Mr. Venugopal, it is different. You need to have different kind of experts who are knowledgeable, and they are. Fortunately, they are. It's not that they are not there, but we need to engage them. We don't need this time the tiger experts, which you need for your other areas. We need people who understand vegetation, who understand grasslands, who understand floral diversity, and who understand that this kind of a diversity needs to be captured forever. And lastly, as I said, Dr. Shendre and his group is doing some excellent work on outreach. And I'm sure that this event also is a part of outreach, because ultimately it is the reports are good. They need to be prepared, but there has to be some action on those reports. And this action is what I'm now talking of. And I'm sure the deliberations further will lead to that. But having an outreach, having an understanding of a very unique area like Kaas is very, very important. And while Eric knows, UNESCO has its own system of periodic reporting. And that periodic reporting is a cyclical event. What I want to stress here, Dr. Shendre, to your credit, that while the UNESCO cycle of reporting is periodic and comes once in 4 years, it comes through regions, an annual reporting by you is something which I wish all our sites, not only in India, but anywhere else in the world can take up. Because this is an internal system. We need to develop an internal system. We need to empower our own people to do a regular monitoring. Because if there is a change in phenology, see today, the last thing I want to say is the relationship with what you are doing with the climate change. Mr. Venugopal, the entire world is looking at climate change. But while we talk big, and we should talk big at the policy level, what happens at the ground level is also very important. And it is these tiny little flowers which have their own story to tell. Because if phenology changes because of change in climate, then the flowering will change. And we must keep an eye if there are signs of early flowering, late flowering, no flowering, and so on. So these phenological studies are very important. And I'm sure Mr. Shendre and his group, they have a series of competent plant scientists in them who keep a regular watch. And this watch is very, very important. Unfortunately, this kind of a monitoring is largely observational. You don't need camera traps, you don't need drones, you don't need, I mean, if you have them, it's okay. But if you don't have them, it is your own pair of eyes which can do that. And it's a small area, people can walk, people can approach, open almost all the year round. So these are some of the high points which I would say we need to emphasize, and we need to bring in our outreach strategy, that this tiny little place which has been inscribed on the list is so very important, and it can help giving some good practice examples for other sites to lead. So Mr. Shendre, I'll stop here and request our colleagues to follow and add on to whatever else they want to add. I'm sure very valuable. And if there are Q&A or questions in the end, I would be very willing to answer them. Thank you once again for providing this opportunity.
Thank you, Vinodji, for that presidential address. I'm so pleased to listen to you, the one who had seen not only the inscription, but the history before inscription. And he has been following after the post-inscription activities so closely. Whenever I get the doubts, whenever I see the threats, my first call goes to Dr. Vinod Mathur. And he tries to hint me, I'm not a botanist, neither biologist, neither biodiversity expert. So he tells to me, and he knows that I have a chemical engineering mind, to suit my mind what needs to be done. And I think that is very interesting to listen. What I liked most, Eric Venugopalji and Dr. Bharucha, is his phenological term and the symbolism of flowering. The Kaas is a flowering story. It is a story when flower booms, the people are happy. But remember that flower has also the age which will make it look like an old flower. And we are trying to see that while the flower will become old, we have to make sure that the others' flowers bloom. And I think that is our responsibility, to make sure that the flowers keep blooming. And that is his message. How it is to be done, I think we will all see. I'm sure the role of the community there is more important, but we have to work with the community. We have to provide them a guidance. I think the community comes first, that the collaboration and collective efforts probably will follow along with that. But thank you very much, Dr. Vinod Mathur. I must say that I have given a very less short notice, call it a short notice, for you to join in. I know how busy you must be as a chairman of National Biodiversity Authority, and it's not an easy job at all. But I think Dr. Mathur is grown up in a busy life all the time, and he has given this time to us. Thank you very much. I'm sure something will come out of it. And we will probably enhance the efforts to reduce the threats to the Kaas Plateau and take and avail the opportunities so that the sustainable development takes place in spite of challenges that we have, the most important being the climate change. Our next speaker is Eric Falt. I was wondering how I can, in a very brief way, introduce Eric Falt. I've been telling my friend, but I don't think that is the introduction of his. That probably is the introduction of me. But let me start, Eric, if you don't mind.
Don't make it too long. Don't embarrass me.
No, I'm not going to. Eric is a Frenchman, probably the only Frenchman I've ever seen, or the French diplomat who speaks English without a French accent. I think that's what I would say first. The second thing I will say is widely experienced and traveled. Take the name, like difficult countries: Haiti, Cambodia, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And he says India is also not very easy country to deal with. So he is now.
I never said that. You're putting words in my mouth here.
Yeah, he's making it easy. I can say that. He's making it easy to work with, and his work has been effective, well recognized. He's very short time in India at present, but he is continuing his efforts. And he manages Bangladesh, Bhutan, of course, India, Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka. But his travelogue and his working places include the countries which I talked about. He was stationed for a major part of his achievements in Nairobi with United Nations Environment Program, and later on in headquarters in New York as a sort of an information technology and media person who is in charge of those activities. I've been talking to Eric about the Kaas Plateau. I've been telling him how the young people and the students from the Thayer Policy Center's Smart Campus Cloud Network are in the forefront to collect the data and put it in a perspective so that people can understand it. And it is not just for making a report, but making sure that the actions start and originate from there. Eric has been quite apologetic in not visiting Kaas up till now, but every time I invite him, he says that he will do it next time, but he is keeping a close watch on it. And I'm sure the next time he will be visiting Kaas. So Eric, hope that was not longish. And I give the floor to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raj. It's always a pleasure to see you, to interact with you, and in this case, to address this event today organized by Thayer Policy Center. You've actually, a lot of us wonder what they're going to do after their many years working for the UN, and you have shown the way. I think you've given an excellent example to all of us, because you continue to serve your community and people around you, and that's very important. The word community is one that is going to come, has already appeared in our discussions today, and will continue to be very important in what I have to say. Vinod has also very aptly set the stage already and mentioned many important elements. The Western Ghats, as you know, is now one of 40 World Heritage Sites in India. and it's really the only one with such a constellation of sites included as part of a serial nomination. Vinod mentioned that, and the Kaas Plateau, as one of them, is very, very important. And right from the beginning, I think that what I can say is that it's also a good example of how community dialogue can be managed for the effective conservation of the world natural heritage. Yes, as we heard earlier, inscription is of course the moment when everybody comes together to celebrate, but the management of a property afterwards is very important. In some cases, you also know that there is a possibility that an inscription on the UNESCO World Heritage list can be withdrawn. I'm sure it will not be the case for the Western Ghats, and I can see and I can vouch for the fact that the management remains a key concern. It's very different, obviously, to look at the management of a site in an urban setting, or in the management of a monument, and the management of the natural environment. But quite clearly, I think the ingredients that you are using are the right ones. I know that there's a very important Joint Forest Management Committee, for instance. I know that the Tariff Policy Center and the villages that are included have worked in a concerted action to identify opportunities and threats linked to the property for, well, over the last decade already, because that's also a moment to celebrate. And it's true also that you are identifying, I'm sure you'll go into more detail, a number of difficulties. And it's not really a surprise, because a lot of natural sites all over the world are facing similar difficulties. The latest annual report card, I know that you're revealing, has shown that the Kaas Plateau, for instance, is exposed to excessive tourism, invasive species, climate change. Some of it has already been mentioned, and I know you will go into more detail, but my first comment is that you're not alone, and unfortunately a lot of sites around all over the world are facing very similar threats, sometimes even more. Concerning the part on tourism, perhaps I should mention, for those who may not be familiar, that whereas UNESCO, all the UNESCO sites, including World Heritage sites, but also biosphere reserves, are of course supporting good tourism planning development. In principle, the follow-up for issues related to tourism development in the UN system, and I know, Raj, you know that very well, are being handled by the UN WTO, the World Tourism Organization. Their headquarters are based in Madrid, and they can be an important partner also in looking at issues related to sustainable tourism. Of course, UNESCO can assist also in developing tourism plans with a specific capacity and knowledge that we can bring to the table, focusing on culture, education, and the sciences sector. Climate change, yes, again, it's already been mentioned, is the defining issue of our time, particularly when it comes to natural sites. It has become very much a cross-cutting issue for us in the UN. It's dealt with by a lot of United Nations agencies, funds, and program. You and I, Raj, worked at the UN Environment Program, and of course, it is perhaps the one UN entity that is most focused on climate change. But everybody is looking at climate change because it is impacting in one way or the other our everyday lives in a variety of ways. If you are not aware, perhaps I can mention a few things that could be useful for you in the future. The first one is that we're currently developing a World Climate Education Atlas. That's not so new, but still an important notion, so that the communities get educated about the importance of climate change. Education is one of the main aspects of UNESCO's mandate. That's why I wanted to mention this to you. Actually, on the 22nd of March, we will launch, I think, a very innovative set of climate science literacy materials. There's all sorts of posters, videos, and social media tiles which have been developed by UNESCO with a number of other United Nations agencies. This is material that is available for free for anyone who's interested. Invasive species has been mentioned in passing, and that's also an important aspect. It's an issue for nature conservation all over the world. And there again, we can provide some support, but it's also very important to work with the other stakeholders who are truly specialized in this area. And when it comes to World Heritage Sites, I'm sure you know that UNESCO's permanent partner for the evaluation of all the natural heritage sites is IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So it's really important to also that at the regional level and sometimes, if possible, at the local level, you be able to work with them. So the inscription, also a point that I wanted to make on as a World Heritage Site is very important. I mean, it is through this list that we bring together around the world the most exceptional natural and cultural sites. And yes, as you know very well, Raj, and as you're showing, the convention is not just to address issues with governments. It is also about working with local communities and then indigenous peoples, but also the private sector and many other stakeholders. All the stakeholders have a role to play in the management of a site, and like the Western Ghats and the Kaas Plateau in particular. And the monitoring of the state of conservation is really important. We can help. We try to help. Of course, the means of UNESCO and the number of sites, now more than 1,000 sites around the world, is limited, but we can provide technical assistance. We are there to help build the capacity of the at the level of at the national level, mostly through a series of projects, sometimes on the ground, that bring together all of the stakeholders. In concluding, I want to say that the old mountain chain of the Western Ghats really is quite unique in the listing of World Heritage Sites. It represents geomorphic features of great importance, with really truly unique biophysical and ecological processes at play. That's why it's very important that they be managed properly. It has an exceptionally high level of biological diversity, and well, it is recognized. Perhaps all of you already know it, but I want to emphasize as one of the world's 8 hottest hotspots for biological diversity. So that alone shows how important it is. I wanted to join you today simply to support your own efforts, Raj, and those of the TER Policy Center at large. It's very important to work with stakeholders, to support the state departments concerned in monitoring of the site, bring together the local communities. That is absolutely crucial, and make them an important stakeholder in the World Heritage Convention. So congratulations on this point. Actually, the inclusion of communities is one of the 5 strategic objectives in the World Heritage Convention. And it really reflects the need to increase more and more community engagement at all stages of the World Heritage process. It showcases also the importance of rights-based approaches that link conservation and sustainable development. So I really wish you great success for this event. I will not be able to stay until the end, but certainly I know you will have a vigorous debate also. And it is important to have a continuous science-based management of the Kaas Plateau in the Western Ghats, and you are showing the way. So congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was I call Eric's speech always as a synonym of called as a brilliant. Thank you very much. I think you have highlighted not only just an overview of certain threats like climate change, but you have gone to the ground level of emphasizing the importance of communities. And I think that is very important. I think that's one of the elements which UNESCO has brought out, that without community, the experts are not able to do the conservation. It's the community who is going to do it. Experts probably can tell their experiences from the other region, also tell their scientific data and open knowledge, but it ultimately is the community who is going to do it. And I think we have to recognize that community. And I'm sure Eric in future will help us in strengthening the community's efforts. We are not for publishing the annual report cards per se. We are in the process of publishing the community lessons, community stories, and community efforts, what they are doing in order to do the effective conservation. And I think if you can come out, because Eric is excellent in terms of documentation. He does that in such a brilliant way that you get inspiration of that. And I suggest to him that his next project should be the compilation of community stories, because communities are our real heritage. And those are not much talked about. We only know who created a heritage, who is the creator of heritage. But the people who helped in creating it are something which is more important to be highlighted. So thank you, Eric, again. And I'm sure we are going to come to you for further assistance to help the communities and getting the UNESCO's knowledge overall. Before introducing Professor Iraq Barucha, let me talk about some communities. I'm going to talk about and taking the names of the villages who are doing excellent efforts, starting with Kaas, Atali, Kasani, Ekiv, Kusumbi, and the people and the Sarpanch, the head of those villages. And the people, many of them are so hardworking people. They keep on running around in the nearby cities for selling their products, for doing their jobs, maybe the employments elsewhere to support their own families, but they are the ones who are conserving. Some of them are, let me take their names: Vishnu Kirdat, Vitthal Kirdat, Somnath Jadhav, Bajrang Kadam, and I also have the experts, which are Ramchandra Bhosle and Sandhya Chaubule. I cannot help and I cannot miss the experts of Dr. Aparna Vatve and Prerna Agarwal, who not only do the research of the plateau, but they also do the research of the minds of the people around there. And they connect it to the problems of community problems with the Kaas Plateau issue of what is called as a nature problems. And that makes their work stand out. They are mingled, their research work and scientific research is mingling with the communities and trying to understand how the conservation efforts. Exemplary. Dr. Venugopal has talked about learning from this webinar. What I learned over the last 10 years is how the scientific data can be collected for the utility of the community by interacting with community. I've never seen that before. And I think these two ladies, Prerna as well as Aparna, have been working very hard on that. And I think they get inspiration from Dr. Vinod Mathur as well as Iraq Barucha. Professor Barucha has been involved right from the beginning in developing this proposal of Western Ghats. And we are going to listen to him. He's a professor, passionate professor of biodiversity and heading the environmental department in Bharati Vidyapit, which is a Bharati University in Pune. Professor Barucha, it's you.
Thank you very much, Rajendra. Thanks, Tere, for having me to talk here. I must say, I am certainly not an expert on the Kaas Plateau. I'm not also an expert on the Western Ghats. I'm professionally, as you perhaps always don't remember, I'm a surgeon. And I, till very recently, worked as a surgeon, but I dabbled with a lot of conservation projects and programs for many, many years. I want to bring out that Kaas is not the only such hot speck of biodiversity in the Western Ghats. And as you rightly mentioned, you have 39 sites. But if you really look at it in the wider perspective, there are hundreds of sites. It's not only plateau tops, it's forts, which have a historical value as well. It's architectural parts of the old forts. It's got a whole lot of other escarpments, which are very valuable. It's got whole slopes. So if you look at Kaas itself, you can look at it as a part of this whole landscape, and that there are multiple such very diverse sites. And if you look at Kaas itself, very close by is the crestline of the Western Ghats. It's got the plateau fringe forests on either side of the plateau, particularly on the western side. And it's got this very typical, extremely precious vegetation of the ground flora of the plateau. So it has these incredible advantages from the point of view of what. And I think it's the specific management that you're able to bring out on Kaas, which parts of it can be replicable and parts of it need to be so locale specific that you need to look at this chain of hot specs along the Western Ghats, especially so between the protected areas. So may I have the next slide, please, Saurabh?
Yeah.
I don't know whether people can see my slides. Can you share screen? Right. So here you see what I've just mentioned, that you have got, no, I think I can't see my screen. Yeah,
we are able to see now.
So you can see here, yes, I can see. And I hope everybody else can see as well. So you have the crestline, you have these edges of the plateaus, the fringes, and you have this incredible lateritic plateau top. And this needs to become like a network of hot specs, small areas of great value, especially because they then act as jump sites for species, both plant species probably, as well as very much so faunal species, to be able to go through the rest of the matrix of vegetation from one site to another, and therefore maintain a genetic viability as well. So I think this is a very, very important aspect that we very often miss. And looking at it, therefore, as a landscape with its surrounds and with the cultural landscapes around them, and what is permeable and non-permeable in that matrix is a very, very key issue. And this is where I think, next please, if you look at it, you have the protected areas of Maharashtra, which I've demarcated there in the Western Ghats, but you see the breaks now, increasingly so in the last 10 years, where the corridor is going. If you look at the ecologically sensitive areas around them, which I have demarcated there, they're shrinking. So with this background, one needs to look at these corridors between protected areas, not necessarily as forest corridors, but as the buffers as well as ecologically sensitive areas, which are managed specifically so that even small areas are preserved. Because think of it this way, we have just a few large protected areas and there's very little chance of making more. Then these large number of small areas may become extremely important. The plateaus, forts, sacred groves, escarpments, specialized habitats, all reserve forest subtypes which have not been planted up, are really the crux of what we should do at a landscape level. Next, please. So if you look at Kaas, you need to define it as the ecosystem as well as the specific flora that you get there. And to me, that is very important because the threats to the ecology of these areas has become very, very rapid. And the change in the threats that is happening with urbanization, roads, even industrial areas at the edges of the Western Ghats are huge impacts now. So these changes which are moving from the old agricultural type of impacts, which was considerably small, has grown enormously with this modern new type of development strategy which we are using in the Western Ghats. And Kaas is an example of this because of its tourism, and I'll talk about that a bit. So if you look at this ecosystem and the Drosera there, which is there, but the Drosera now is surrounded by grass, which is quite disturbing. But if you look at this diversity, it is so very specific, and hardly anybody except the real botanists like Aparna and so on, who realize that this diversity is probably more important than the diversity you have in the evergreen forests or the crestline. Next, please. If you think of this, I think, next, please, Saurabh. The thing of seasonality, which was mentioned today, I think is incredibly important because the flowering periods are so small, and it's very exciting to look at it over that few monsoonal months as it changes practically from week to week. Next, please. But to me, being not a botanist, it is just very, very beautiful. And that thing that hits you when you get there, especially if you get there on a quiet day when there are no tourists, is absolutely mind-boggling. And I have done this several times, not as often as I would like, because I need to go to all sorts of funny places. But the whole, next please, the whole thing is the uniqueness of these plateaus. And I think that has to be given a very great importance. Next, please. So if you look at this Drosera, which is not really so rare that you don't get it in other spots, but it's something where you know that this is going to be unique. So some things that one goes and sees there, one realizes, oh, I don't see this in too many other areas, that sort of thing. Next, please. The next most important thing, which I think of, is the habitat features of this plateau. And the so many other plateaus which have both parallels and differences. That lake, for instance, which is very crucial, one smaller one, there's one larger one. And there is so much evidence of fauna, which I never thought was there, right? And this faunal abundance that is there is probably very unique as well. Reptiles and a whole lot of insect life that you see there is probably very, very unique because, well, it's well known that if you have one taxa which is very rich in the same area, you have got other taxa also which are rich in species. So one needs to look at this from that sort of an angle. And I must tell you, it was much more fun for someone like me to be there with my camera before Kaas became known to all the botanists of this whole region who started going there. And the media, of course, picked it up and popularized it. Now, at that time, one thought that popularizing something like this is very important to be able to spread that message. But somewhere down the line, these things do change. And change is a part of cultural ecology. You cannot wish it away. Next, please. And therefore, understanding that these changes can occur is very important. And I really believe that Kaas should not be looked at as Kaas itself, as the plateau top, but as a whole ecosystem, its fringe, its neighboring areas of the hill slopes, neighboring areas of cultural diversity which are there. I think these are things that we can look at. You go a little bit away from Kaas and you'll see a forest with Maharashtra's very important species, which is the giant Malabar giant squirrel, and so on. So you have orchids and you have climbers and you have this very large number of parasitic plants, and you have these little streams that come down in the Western Ghats. These are parts of the plateau because it is the plateau which feeds those streams. And this is something which therefore needs to be looked at also. Finally, I must get on to this huge problem that we see now. Next, please. If we look at this, the unsustainability of the tourism, in spite of it being fenced up like that, I think is enormous. I'm not a good botanist to tell you how much that impact will be, but it only needs common sense to look at. And is this what we really believe should be the carrying capacity of an area like this? We keep saying they're small, they're beautiful, they're rich. How can one support this kind of tourism? So how do we maintain this at a sustainable level and very often when we ask people to do this, they are going to look naturally at how much revenue they can get from it. They are not going to look at it necessarily from the plant value. We can sell this with good communication. And that if you go on like this, then of course, what is today a gold mine for you from tourism is going to disappear. So I think we need to understand, there were so many debates of, should you have a fence like that? Should you have one part of it open and the rest of it closed? I don't think those debates are still resolved. Next, please. And now I come to more or less my last slide. This is becoming a whole new debate. You know, all these years when I looked at conservation, one looked at it as conservation versus certain types of development, like the plateau top, which is being mined there, not too far away from Kaas. But today, we are pitting the need for climate change mitigation by bringing windmills and solar plants against the values of biological diversity. You see this picture with local people who need it for grazing land. You see climate change requiring windmills and solar plants. Can these be made to coexist in some way? How much better management can you do in spite of wanting to make windmills or wanting to put solar plants? This is where the dilemma is really very complex. Because when it's about economic development versus nature, we can say nature has huge long-term benefits, has ecological services, which sometimes are very difficult to measure. And you can argue on that line. But when you have to say, do I want biological diversity of this little place conserved versus getting electrical energy from a solar plant, this becomes very, very complex. And I really have no answers to this. I do believe that you can do the best possible in a windmill or in a solar plant and say, what are the parts of biological diversity I can save? How do I match that together in a management program, which is different? How do I manage it only for biodiversity and say, Kaas Plateau, sorry, no windmills, no solar plant, right? And then say, other plateaus, I might have to, well, in a sense, sacrifice to getting climate change to be thought about. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. So there are many obvious options in the legal provisions. You get wildlife sanctuary, community reserves, conservation reserves, which can fit any of these small sites there. You have that under the Wildlife Protection Act. But you have also biodiversity management sites, which come under biodiversity heritage sites of the Biodiversity Act. And we need to exploit that. So whereas you have a good JFMC, adding on, even in the same JFMC, the aspect of a biodiversity management committee under the BD Act, I think is of critical importance because that is what Vinod looks at. And this is where a huge amount of conservation can be done in these multiple small areas which local people feel close to. It's about making those local people who are already close to these areas physically also become increasingly emotionally attached. And last of all, there is the SDGs, in which you have other effective area-based conservation measures, which Vinod and I discussed long back, and I don't know how far we have got with that. But that's another way. So you can see there are already legal provisions where we can use this, and matching that, the right one with that right legal provision becomes very important. Next, please. And so the last thing is, what about the future? I think you have tried to make a biodiversity conservation plan, but that conservation plan should look at two things. It must look at the specifics of Kaas, but you must also, I think now, decide to go wider and say, what about other plateaus? I cannot do the same management that I'm doing just for tourism in Kaas. Do I have to look at wider aspects of this? And therefore, sustainable ecotourism only becomes one part of your management plan. We have to look at acceptance by the Forest Department and governance. Because if we do not do this, it cannot really, we don't have the strength that way to be able to do that through any other means today. we've got to look at funding possibilities. How much funding can you expect from government repeatedly to do this kind of thing? And therefore, it's very important to look at people's participation. So the reasons for people's participation is to make it possible at the local level. And I believe the Biodiversity Act actually goes towards that. I hope it doesn't get watered down now, because they're trying to look at biodiversity changes in the acts and so on. And to me, and my 50 years of experience with conservation and wildlife, is communication, education, and public awareness. There is no other way to bring about a society which really meaningfully looks at biological diversity, except if we bring in communication, education, and public awareness. And that means building from the school level, the youth at colleges. It doesn't matter whether you're a botanist or a zoologist or an engineer or, like myself, a medical practitioner. Everybody needs to be sensitized to this. And that must happen through the young days, because these are the people who will have to manage this place in future. Next, please. Finally, what do we not want? Rajendra, I think this is a huge example of what we don't want. Do we want Kaas and all these other little sites to become like the Panchgani Plateau, which you see here? It's a Panchgani desert. It's horrible. And I, as a child, used to spend my summer vacations there. I remember it before all this happened. And what happened was excessive over-tourism pushed by local people as well as by government. And the ability to preserve that plateau, even though it's a specifically dominated, ecologically sensitive area, has not worked. So I think with that, next please. My last slide is my small little institute where I work. And I hope you can come and visit us sometime. But this is something which we really believe in. We really believe that education at various levels, from school to college to postgraduate level, can make changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. As we probably all guess that we will be hearing some wise words from you, and this is what exactly has happened. You not only put us in a lot of dilemma-like situations, but you also showed us the way forward, how we can go ahead with it. I must say that, yes, I did not said the real profession of Professor Bharucha, but I don't think I missed much, because at the end of his presentation, I feel that he's a surgeon of nature. So he has tried to find out certain tumors, cancers, and healthy spots in the body of nature. And he tries to make sure that the healthy parts are encouraged and certain tumors and cancer-like species are removed. And I think I must say that we require more surgeons like him to go to the nature and tell us more about it. Thank you, Dr. Bharucha.
Why, Rajendra, you want all surgeons to become poor?
Well, it depends on the patients, I suppose. So if we give the patients enough awareness, education, I don't think they are required to go to the surgeon at all. Same thing about the surgeon of the nature. But I think that more or less completes our tour, except that we have to hear from Venugopalji. I know that he wanted to learn more about what is happening on Kaas Plateau. But at this stage, I would like to tell something more before Venugopalji takes his floor. I think the very last slide of Professor Bharucha was telling almost everything. That we need to educate community, we need financial resources, we know we need the collective wisdom of the experts, and we need the conservation management techniques. And all these have to come together. And I'm sure the government has to play an important role. Let me tell you my experience, having spent about 2 decades in United Nations on handling one of the most successful programs of, by any standard, of saving the ozone layer for the biodiversity to flourish on this earth. I'm convinced that this is an example of Kaas Plateau, where the first community has taken an initiative and the government has come later on. Let it be frank about it. But that does not make government's role diminutive or doesn't make unprioritized. I think the people like Venugopalji, who has been handling the diverse portfolios, which is almost opposing to each other, the portfolios, like industry and forest. I wish that some smart and intelligent government puts one IAS officer for both industry and the forest. Why not? And I think that would probably say, but I think Dr. Bharucha was putting himself in the middle of 2 dilemmas. One about saving the cars and another is about development. Some of them are even sustainable development, like windmills and solar panels and all those things. But still, they affect the biodiversity. So he is probably, I remember Bhagavad Gita, the battle in Mahabharata, where you cannot pinpoint which side is right and which side is wrong. And that's why one of the soldiers, Arjun, got a dilemma, why he is fighting for, and what exactly is the way to go ahead. And I'm going to look at Venugopalji to probably, first, this is something not first-hand information, but probably first-hand experience of his, having held a diverse portfolio, how we can go about it. Venugopalji, we are definitely looking forward to your ideas, but most importantly, the financial and other human resource development resources in order to get going on a job. The time is limited. I'm not talking about this webinar, but I'm talking about a time to save the cars from the aspects which could be turn out to be devastating is running out. Yes, it is now nice to have a flotilla on a Rajpath in Delhi to show about the cars, but it's another thing to look at these threats which can become unbearing and probably unmanageable and uncontrollable. And it's better that we get the early signals now and start acting on that. Let me tell you some of the people who have been around and which are worked at a high level in the industry. Like I know that Govind Badapure, he has been HRD manager in SKF in Pune. He has decided to live in Kaas to make sure that the conservation and the human resource development in Kaas, particularly of youth, takes place very well. We have Ramchandra Bhosle, who was a chief manager of Central Bank of India. And he has said that his next part of his life would be to train the youth to take up certain developmental projects in Kaas in such a way that it does not harm the nature. Then we have this principal Sandhya Chaugule. She has said that she will work with the women in Kaas to say that how they can conserve the various aspects of what is called as the Outstanding Universal Values, OAU, which is the UNESCO terminology in Kaas. And then let me tell you, we have this extraordinary youth which is working for their policy center, which I would like to introduce before Venugopalji takes the floor, to tell that these are the people who have put this annual report card together, interacted with the community, understood them, and put it in a nice perspective so that it becomes an action-oriented report, which I've shared with Vinodji as well as Bharuchaji, as well as Eric, who couldn't, who probably is not there because he has to rush to the other program. But can I request Saurabh, Divyanshu, Ankita, and Durga to make their cameras on so that they can then shut off if they want to, but so that the others know who are the one behind it. See, as a chairman of their policy center, I take a credit, but the real work is done by this youth. So I want to bring them on a floor. Ankita, Durga, yes. Is Durga there? Probably she's coming. But let me tell you, Saurabh, Divyanshu, and Ankita, they are the students of sustainability studies in Pune. Saurabh is a nature patient. He's a passion is nature. Today morning he was going on a nature walk. That's what I heard. And on a Sunday, when you normally get up late in the morning and all those things, he was already in nature walk. Divyanshu is a representative which represents the principle of learning while earning. And he is a specialist in aquifers and the GIS studies. Ankita is an architect who has started understanding more on sustainability. Durga is probably not able to get her camera, but she is the environmental architect. And she has been interacting to put this annual report together. So these are the youth who have been extraordinarily putting their efforts in making this annual report card. And they have come out with an excellent, what is called as a recommendations. And their one recommendation is the lessons from Kaas need to be disseminated to the other 39 website, serial sites in Western Ghats. I'm not saying that they are successful lessons. There are some not so successful. So there has to be networking. And we are proposing the first networking should take place of the serial sites only in Maharashtra. That is Chandoli, Radhanagari, Koyna, and Kaas. So that they start interacting with each other. Their second recommendation is to make sure that the scientists, what they are talking about, invasive species and alien species, and various practices like grazing and what is called as allowing the tourists to grow without their without understanding the carrying capacity, need to be studied scientifically, done some demonstration and experiments to prove what we are doubting, and then proceed with the policy change. So they are talking about evidence-based policy change in Kaas Plateau. And third thing that they are trying to tell us that utilize the women power. We always see that men are in forefront in villages. Let women come in a forefront in villages because they understand probably the nature better than men. It is probably hurts men's ego, but that seems to be the true thing, that they are the one who can take leader. I can see Durga Kamath now there, who's the environmental architect. So having introduced those kind of human resources that we have, which we need to encourage them in order to start actions on Kaas and other 38 serial sites, or at least the sites in Maharashtra, we would like to look at you, Venugopalji, to listen to you on your impression, your first-hand a sort of an vision about this plateau and the northern serial sites. Thank you. Dr. Venugopalji, you can go ahead.
Namaskar. Good afternoon to all of you.
Good afternoon.
In fact, it's a privilege and honor to be participating in this program along with Dr. Vinod Mathur, renowned person in wildlife management and various other things related to forests. Mr. Barucha, Mr. Fall, and all the distinguished participants. Dr. Mathur, Dr. Fault, and Dr. Barucha, they have given great insights into the various aspects of management of Kaas Plateau. I have gone through the annual report also, which Dr. Rajendra Shinde was kind enough to share with me. What I understand from that is the various biotic and abiotic pressures which are being created over there in the form of excessive tourism, invasive alien species, and also the climate changes that are adversely impacting the plateau management, the biodiversity conservation. In fact, this year when I had the plan to go there to see for myself, my staff, they told me that this year it was adversely impacted by excessive rains during the months of August and September. So I was not lucky enough to go and have a look at the beautiful plateau in the current year. Now, in the current context of changing environmental climate changes, I think there is all the more a need to for all the stakeholders to come together and plan for a biodiversity conservation plan of the plateau in a much more comprehensive and very solid manner. At this point, I would like to mention to you that Honorable Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Shri Uddhavji Thackeray, had directed and given a mandate to the Forest Department for preparing a gene bank project, wherein basically the effort will be to conserve biodiversity, which is of importance to the state and the nation. In fact, the background to this was that the government of Maharashtra, through its Rajiv Gandhi Science and Technology Commission, had commissioned a project some 5 years ago, and they did a wonderful job by preparing a project report as well as by implementing various projects, mini projects under this gene bank project. And now the Honorable Chief Minister has directed us to take that forward, to expand that, and to enhance the scope and make it a sort of permanent mechanism. There are 7 verticals in that gene bank project which was implemented, and one among them is grasslands and savanna biodiversity management. And apart from that, ecological conservation within the forests also. Now, I think what we'll be talking in gene bank project, or the projects that we'll be taking up gene bank project, are not different from what we are talking today. I think here also there is ample scope to subsume, Kaas Plateau management or conservation into this kind of gene bank project. Of course, that may be in a limited sense, but here, as you have given great insights, what I can understand is there are many more aspects which need to be tackled here. It's not only simple conservation, but the pressures created by tourism or various other factors is extremely important. So all that I would say at this juncture is that now, as Dr. Barucha has mentioned very clearly, that it is communication, education, and awareness which hold the key to conservation of this biodiversity of a global importance. Now, that communication, education, and awareness is required in all the stakeholders, which includes the government functionaries also. Now, I would like to tell all of you that the government will be very keen to understand from the experts and the scientists the various aspects of this biodiversity conservation, and would like to take a keen participation, very active participation in preparing a sustainable conservation plan for Kaas Plateau. While saying we use the word sustainable, I mean that here various stakeholders have to be taken into confidence. They have to be made active partners by adopting a very inclusive approach. This is what which is which holds the key for conserving this great asset of ours in a permanent manner. So I'm sure that Tere and other stakeholders in this will be guiding us through the process. In fact, I would like to thank and compliment Dr. Rajendra Shende and Dr. Vinod Mathurji also for taking the painstaking efforts since 2012 onwards, when Kaas Plateau and various other sites have got inscribed in the World Natural Heritage List. There's a Herculean effort, I would say, because getting anything documented in such a fashion and convincing the global community for inclusion as a World Natural Heritage Site is a tremendous job. Now, having achieved that, they have continuously and in a very sustained way have kept the efforts all these years in documenting the progress being made there and involving the village communities and involving the NGOs and researchers, all of them in this gigantic task. Now, what we need to do is take up, let me admit that I don't have great knowledge on this subject, but what I could glean is that now there is a great need for bringing the researchers, NGOs, and local communities together to understand the policy issues over there and the administrative issues also. Now, from as a policymaker or as an administrator, I would really like to request all of you to kindly provide us the necessary inputs in the form of policy prescriptions and administrative actions that would be required for conserving this great biodiversity. So this is what I would like to say at this point in time. And I look forward for a very intense kind of engagement and intense kind of interaction between all of us in the times to come, so as to set a model in biodiversity conservation of this kind. So that's what I have to say in this program, and I look forward again to interact with all of you in a more intense way in the days to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venugopalji. I think I feel slightly guilty because I just contacted you about 2 days back, though I had been given your contacts much earlier by my friend Vikas Kharge, who is now Principal Secretary to Uddhavji. But you made yourself available. And not only that, I think you have been humble in saying that this is not, you are not going to be speaker, you are learner. And that made us think that probably you are the one from whom we can get some vision of how to proceed further. We will definitely get in touch with you under the guidance of Vinodji as well as Dr. Eric Barucha, to not to just make yet another plan or yet another document, but initiating some actions which are proved to be a successful action for conservation elsewhere. So let's make action based on evidences first, and the plan can probably proceed parallel. But let's not have this plan first and then action second, because we need to accelerate. We need an accelerator. And I feel that with you as a Venugopalji, we have an accelerator. And I know Vinodji is always in the front of actions. I mean, in a short time, he gets certain things done. We have seen that. Whether it is a UNESCO's institute, or whether it is a whatever the level of that, or getting another natural heritage done. And it has moved so fast. It's unparalleled speed. And I think that unparalleled speed is what the present government under the Modi ji wants. That just get going. Don't keep on planning and brooding over it and that kind of thing. So I agree with it. I think the first thing we will start with the meeting on a Kaas Plateau, probably, where action should start, and where the nature has to be put on a surgeon's table, if at all it is possible. I'm saying that whole earth is a surgeon's table, and the nature is only a patient on that earth, which probably the surgeon like Barucha Saab can dissect and find a solution. And Vinodji will be our guiding torch in this activity. Yes, Vinodji, go ahead.
Permit me to say that if somebody is trying to take nature on surgeon's table, it could be the most foolish thing in the world to do that. 100% rejection is going to take place, even without Dr. Barucha even holding his knife. So let's not commit that mistake. Let us be very humble and let us respect nature and let us allow the natural processes to occur.
Okay.
And if a surgeon's knife is needed, it is on human mind and brain and body.
Yes.
That is where you need to cut them to size and to make them work nicely. Sorry for saying that, but back to you.
I think right. I think I
You
definitely
are not
made
a neurosurgeon, huh?
neurosurgeon. Yeah,
I'm
I
not a
think.
neurosurgeon.
Yeah, I think I made this table and the nature as a patient as a probably too extreme and too stretched and symbolism. I think you are right. I think it's a men and a human society has to be on a table. And I think their mind need to be surgeoned by the people. I totally agree with you. Thanks for that. That could be our theme, that the men are the patient and the nature takes his own course. And probably nature is a surgeon for doing it possible. Yeah. So I think with that kind of lighter comments, I think we have come to the closure of it. But before we close, there is one more important thing to be done, is the release for the press. And I think our journalist friends are there to watch us. I did not refer to the journalists in the beginning to welcome, because I thought that each one of you, particularly Venugopalji, will become very conscious of it. And probably the real thing and the real vision may not come out. So my all friends from the media, if at all I have not welcomed you in the beginning and shown your presence, is only to honor you, to make sure that you hear from horse's mouth the real thing, so that tomorrow's, I'm not talking headlines, but at least tomorrow's columns or columns to come in future probably are filled with realism. So my journalist friends probably will be seeing the launch of this annual report card, 2019 and 2020. The 2021 report card, we expect to be released on 5th June 2022. That is a World Environment Day. And I'm sure that time, Venugopalji will be in a much more forefront, and he will not be learner, but he will be professor by that time. And I'm sure that would be most useful thing to do. So we will be now releasing annual report card, but more importantly, the Kaas Plateau conservation community has been demanding the UNESCO's management document of World Natural Heritage for a long time. And we did give them in English, but now we have translated it into the Marathi, so that those who want to know about it and take action can do it. And it just doesn't remain an elite part of only few understand it. So we are also releasing a Marathi translation, Marathi guidelines of UNESCO World Natural Heritage Management. I would like to tell Venugopalji a particular thing, and it is a fact that whatever we are doing for Kaas Plateau, which is hardly about 20-25 kilometers from my birthplace where I got educated, that is a Rehmatpur village. And that's why I have a special passion for the Kaas Plateau. We are not taken any funding from any sources, whether it is a government, CSR or foundation. We have utilized our own internal funding in order to prepare all these annual report cards up till now, encouraging the young minds to go there and work with the communities, translating the world management guidelines. They're all done internally without any external financial resources. I want to make it very sure so that people don't understand that we are holding these webinars in a big way and having a big personalities there. We must be rich in financial resources. We are not. We are rich in education given by the nature. And we are rich in experience that we have gathered up till now. So I'm going to request Saurabh to release these guidelines as well as annual report card in a typical online fashion. And let's look at how he has done it. Saurabh, are you there?
Yeah, my colleague Durga would be sharing it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Durga, you can start. Excellent. That was very quick. And I'm sure that the Kaas Plateau community will appreciate it. And those probably we also need to translate into Marathi, the annual report card, which should not be very difficult. And I think we come to the end of our program schedule, but not end of the question answer session. So Saurabh, floor is yours. Start whatever the questions you have got up till now.
Yeah, so I have a question coming through our YouTube live. So Mr. Shekhar Mohite, he's asking, like, how do we deal with the controlled grazing for Kaas Plateau? Because there has been no domestic animals being now allowed to graze on the declared heritage site. So how do we deal with it?
Probably Vinodji, you can initiate.
See, I am not very clear. Control grazing by what? As you say, domestic animal is not allowed. So if wild animals are grazing, what is the issue? Can you please clarify what is that you are hinting at? I'm not very clear with your question.
Yeah, so there is a context also given to it. So I'll just read out. In last phase of flowering on Kaas Plateau, grasses are more dominant, and the dry matter of grasses forms a mat and covers whole plateau. It doesn't easily decompose, and it interferes the flowering of next season.
Okay, see, let us not forget we are talking of a natural area. We are talking of a natural process. We are talking of a natural succession. For hundreds and millions of years, the same process has happened. And the Kaas Plateau survived and flowers have survived. Evolutionary changes might have occurred. So I would not be overtly worried if there is no human-induced changes which are causing that. So we may have our own perception and say that this is happening, that is happening, but let us give some more time to observe nature. Documentation is good, observation is good, but no immediate action of trying to remove anything or trying to remove it. In some ways, it is the same situation. If you would recall, there is another World Heritage Site in Kevladev National Park, Bharatpur, where we have a wetland, and there were buffaloes who were grazing in that area, and then came the national park status, and we prevented the buffaloes to not enter inside. And the same question was raised that who will perform the role of the buffalo? But 20, 30, 40 years from now, the area is still there. The natural succession is taking place. So let nature take its own course. See, this is the biggest learning that we have. Remove the anthropogenic pressures, remove the human interference, and let the nature take its own course. So don't be worried. Of course, study it, observe it, but do not plan action based on any short-term things and our feelings of emotion that I did not see flowers. Probably this has happened because of that. So just hold on, keep observing. We will take a conscious call once we have enough data set and enough observation. Back to you.
Thank you. Saurabh, next.
I guess Dr. Bharucha has something to add to this.
Yeah, if you really want to look at this, then you have to see, now that you have closed this place for nearly 10 years from cattle, I think, right? Then the understanding of what has happened in the last 10 years has to come out very strongly in a series of studies that people like Aparna have actually done. To understand what was the actual impact of grazing, which was always there, as Vinod says, for thousands of years, probably. Now, how do you do that now? You cannot turn the clock back. You can't even turn the clock forward. So your best thing to do is to compare this now with other sites where certain amount of grazing occurs. Maybe you select the site so that there is minimal grazing, moderate grazing, and see what happens when it's just left to villagers to see how much grazing is there. Once you have a comparative study like that, you will not make a mistake like the one that Vinod mentioned about Bharatpur. So it's also complex, really. And this is more complex than the change that occurred at Bharatpur, because it changed from a wetland into a terrestrial system. It was easier to observe. It was easier to see. Here you will not know until you look at species level thing, which you've got people like Aparna to do. So I think doing a comparative study with some of the other grazing areas which are being used today, very similar to Kaas, and see what happens. That is the only indicator that I feel could be made to work. So that needs a study. It probably needs a study about 5-7 years. It's not something that you can do overnight and say, I think this is the right thing. Then we definitely do the wrong thing.
I think there's a very wise advice from both Vinodji and Professor Bharucha. In fact, during one of the community dialogues in one of the temples there, where I was present, and Prerna Agarwal was presenting her findings, it was taken a decision like this, or sorry, not decision, the recommendations that we should do some kind of a demonstration or experimentation of grazing to see how it affects. Take the lesson from that and then probably convey that to the policymakers before taking action. So let's go slow on that and do that instead of taking it, because we see the immediate adverse effects. And I think we should correct it at the right time. Saurabh?
Yes, right. So moving ahead with the next question. So it is about the fencing that is being used at Kaas to restrict tourism. So there is a question or sort of a recommendation, I would say, coming, like flexible fencing is something that we can go ahead and which could be used only during the flowering season, so that the movement of other species in terms of the fauna also is not getting restricted out of the fencing that is used during the non-flowering seasons.
Saurabh, I won't be able to directly comment without having seen in recent time, but I can only say with experience that interaction between plant, animal, soil, and human is very intense and complicated. And one has to be extremely careful in intervention, in planning intervention when it comes to these 4 elements over there. But I'm sure the local management, with the help of scientific community, should be able to take a call here. And it is definitely for the grasslands, the growing season is very, very important, because that is where the growth happens as far as the grass blade is concerned. So I won't be able to comment directly, but I would only say that habitat interventions are very tempting. Without having a comment on my colleague managers all over the country, we are often tempted to build water holes. If you, Mr. Venugopal, if you look at the history of water holes in the country, our friends and colleagues and managers have gone ahead and left, right, center, they have created the water holes. We are guided by our own self that we need Pyau. Pyau, I'm sure you understand what is Pyau. So from that context, we visualize that animals might be needing, deer might be needing. It is not like that. So we have to give all these things are to be understood in the evolutionary context. There is a whole science of evolutionary ecology which simply tells us that things have co-evolved. So whatever is the water scarcity, whatever is the soil depth, whatever is the plant occurring, has been a product of nature for hundreds of years. So we should not be tempted to allow interventions just because you and I feel it is very, very important. So observational science is very important. And of course, wherever needed, a small scale pilot intervention can also be done. We can mark out, since the Kaas Plateau is very small, you can do some experiments on, say, by 500 by 5 meter plot and see if some interventions are working or not working. But extremely careful and very watchful with a scientific bent, these observational studies should be conducted. Back to you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Vinodji. Saurabh, I think that has been very good recommendations coming up. And I know that some of the experts in the region, like Professor S.R. Yadav of Shivaji University, Dr. Shekhar Mohite, who asked the first question from Satara, along with Prerna and Aparna, have been working together in order to give some kind of an way ahead to the Joint Forest Management Committee, particularly Mohite, who is in DCF Satara, as well as Pardesi, who has been working with the local community from the forest department in Satara. So I think all these people are doing efforts. I think what they need is a very good guidance and initiate certain actions like demonstration or experimentation, which Vinodji is talking about. Saurabh?
I guess Professor Bharucha has something to add.
Yeah.
We Homo sapiens, we have this tendency, which has come from generation to generation, to say, oh, we must do something. And we don't really look at what nature actually does. And this do something is like, I would call it like playing God or playing nature. And that's what leads into sometimes very risky decision-making processes. So what Vinod was saying is very correct. You do some sample thing, you do some sample plot, that's fine. But to say I will change the whole thing in what it is, even in the last 10 years, with that central fence, what your effort should be is, has that central fence really stopped wildlife from coming in there? I really can't imagine that happens. Because it also depends on what species of wildlife we are talking about. And how that is impacting that area, not just during the monsoon, but even at the other end of the place, because in that area, that's probably one of the few water sources. So how are we going to look at that? Needs a very intensive sort of study, which is very specific and actually gives you some sort of answers or guidelines as to what you can actually do there. I believe it is possible to do that. There was always that huge controversy right in the beginning as whether we should fence off that road, as I showed you in my photographs taken years ago. It's unsightly, but I don't know how much damage or how good it is. There was also a fear that by doing something like that and bringing some intervention like that, we'll bring in grass seeds into that area. I don't know whether those grass actually grows there or to what extent it grows, but these are answers which have come from somebody like Aparna, who has actually worked on it for 20 years, if I remember rightly. So that's where those answers must come from. Thank you.
Yes.
So, yeah, moving ahead with our last question, I would say. And coming from the JFMC, it is like, what is the most hopeful opportunity now that we have for Kaas Plateau?
Yeah, it's a nice to end with the hopes. So Vinodji is the person,
The
optimist.
opportunities where communities are involved, I would say livelihood opportunities. That is where everybody would like to look at. That if you have a heritage site next door, if you live near a heritage site next door, what is there for me from this site? You would recall that when we were formulating a UNESCO project, we asked this question to the residents living on the fringe of Kevladev National Park.
Yes.
Because those were the people who were being deprived of collecting grass, collecting fuel wood, moving inside, and so on and so forth. And I must share this example, taking advantage of Mr. Venugopal, that we then conceived of what is called as a natural heritage scholarship program. See, what we did, we were knowing that what kind of revenues are coming, even if they were very small entry fees. And we made the government and UNESCO project fund a little. But we picked up children from the periphery of the villages who were living around Kevladev. And believe me, in the 5 years of the project, we selected every year about 100 students, gave them a scholarship. And what we were able to do, Mr. Venugopal, was to connect with their families. See, the child was fine. The child was getting a fellowship. And we, even in those, I'm talking of 15 years back, we were able to see to it that there was no leakage. There was a child account in the bank with his or her parent, and they were able to do that. So parents said that, look, this is heritage site, and this is what is the benefit that we get. So I'm not saying that is the only way, but we have to think very, very clearly, Mr. Shendre, on incentivizing conservation. This is the new line we need to take. We cannot be restrictive. We cannot just say, you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't come here, don't do this. That is the language which we have been using. I won't say whether it is successful or not, but we need to change our language. We need to think of it that how incentivization can be built. It could be small. It could be for few to begin with. You might have, you cannot even cover all the village development committees that you have, but a pilot project that we run, which sets up an example that this is what is the benefit which can occur. So again, as I said, the bottom line for me in today's dialogue is, Mr. Shendre, that we need to organize small level consultations, whether it is on management or whether it is on monitoring, whether it is on education. Seek people that what is that they want. See, you and I may do anything and everything based on our experience, but let it come from the community, and that is where your approach is, that it is a community based, it is a community led initiative. So if communities are at the forefront, they will ensure that it will become successful. So my suggestion to you is that organize this one day, half day consultations with local people, with scientists, with managers, with civil society. And when you try to prepare this plan of yours, this plan has to be participative. This plan has to be inclusive. This plan has to be science-based. So all these 3 or 4 stakeholders you need to bring in. And I'm very sure Mr. Venugopal would be able to find some funding support to at least organize these consultations. And once we prepare the plan, we can go back and see from where the funds are to be raised. So back to you, Saurabh.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So
I have a small addition to this. Saurabh, somebody raised this as hopeful opportunity or some such terminology. I don't think hope and hoping for something to happen ever works until people actually work. And what it needs now is a very strong SEPA movement that occurs around these kind of sites, which is local communication, education, public awareness, which comes out of 2 very important things. It comes through what we now refer to as transdisciplinary studies, which look through traditional knowledge married to good ecological science. If these 2 things can be brought out, and sort of if you can start a school level program around there, those 4 or 5 villages, it's not huge cost, but you need expert communicators to be able to do that in Marathi, link it to what is already there in the school textbooks for content analysis, which we do at Bharati, and say, these are my key points that I want to put before the local community. And how do I do that through school? And now this area has got colleges everywhere. Use that local college youth. It is equally important as the youth that are grazing their cattle there, or whatever they're getting from the local area, even foragers, whatever. Equally important is this new youth, which is now coming through college, doing different things. It's not necessary that he must be a botanist or a zoologist. I think, in fact, it is better that they are not botanists and zoologists, because they have an open mind to doing this and don't start doing some funny taxonomic research. It means trying to understand which sort of management works. And that kind of thing, if you can start up early, this really can make a difference. It has been known to make a difference. I'm sure VB knows this better than I do, as to which areas where the surrounds of project areas were looked at from this perspective changed enormously in Project Tiger areas, enormously. The villages changed the way they look, and so on. So looking at these tourism things that the local people have put up in these very fancy, of course, tiger reserves, but they've done wonders. There are more sometimes wildlife sightings in those areas which are looked after by these local people than what is looked at inside in the core area, because the core areas are so much larger. Animals are getting concentrated here. I mean, VB has done enormous work on that through these ME programs. We understand much more about this than we did understand even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bharucha. Saurabh, that was the last question.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we are exactly at 5 o'clock. So we may not be that punctual in starting, but I think we are quite punctual in ending it. I'm definitely going to give a floor to Venugopalji to make some kind of a quick couple of minutes program. And then I would like to totally concur with Dr. Professor Bharucha that it is nearby colleges who probably take up a role in going to the school children in such kind of areas like Kaas, and start putting as an education in a front line, so that the mind gets developed, because conservation is not a 1 year or 2 years program. It's a much larger period of life that it exists. And probably it comes down, and probably Saurabh and Ankita and Durga, probably Divyanshu, they understand more. And probably Bharucha Saab also knows it, that our Smart Campus Cloud Note project, network project, is in fact encourages the students in the colleges to go around and probably start some practical things in their surrounding area, rather than just developing a plan or something. Start educating, start awareness, start demonstration projects, start experimentation. And these are the kind of things they are doing. So we would be contacting Venugopalji under the guidance of Vinodji and Bharuchaji to develop some kind of an education programs for the school children around the World Natural Heritage Sites. Venugopalji, we would like to give it to you for concluding it.
All that I would like to say at this juncture is we look forward for a very strong collaborative effort with all the stakeholders, especially the communities and NGOs and researchers. And as Dr. Mathurji had mentioned, engagement with the communities is a key to success here. So we'll keep that principle in mind while taking up all the efforts. And from the department side, I would like to assure you that we'll be very supportive of all the activities that you will be taking up for conservation of Kaas Plateau. And let's keep the dialogue and all the efforts together, and let's make it a successful program in the conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinodji. You want to have a very last? Okay, fine. I think we got an excellent input from your side. And I'm sure the journalist friends will learn more about the annual report card, the progress which we are making, opportunities which we have, and threats as will serve as an early warning. And our team will make sure that the full report would be available to all those who participated in this seminar online, as well as the journalist friends who are not able to participate. So they will be available to them, as well as to the government in a central, state, and colleagues of Mr. Barucha, Dr. Barucha, and Dr. Vinod Mathur. Thank you again to all our media friends, the speakers, and the youth who have worked for making this program successful. Bye. And I think it was a well spent time on a World NGO Day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I wish a wonderful evening to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.